When my son Richard announced to the entire Thanksgiving table that Mom can clear the dishes while we watch the game, after all, she's used to doing housework, and then laughed as if he'd made a harmless joke, I finally understood that the family home I had maintained for 45 years wasn't viewed as my personal residence. It had somehow become a space where my presence was tolerated only for the domestic services I could provide. What Richard hadn't counted on was that my 30-year career as a financial advisor specializing in real estate investments had taught me to retain sole ownership of the property deed, despite his numerous suggestions to simplify things by adding his name, a decision that Judge Marilyn Perkins would later describe as a masterclass in foresight that preserved both financial autonomy and personal dignity in the face of familial entitlement. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from today, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because next week, I'm sharing crucial information about protecting your assets that everyone over 65 needs to hear. My name is Margaret Wilson, and at 73, I've discovered that the people who take your contributions for granted are often the first to act shocked when you finally establish boundaries. For nearly 3 decades, I built a successful career as a financial advisor at Westview Financial Partners, the firm I established in 1985 after recognizing a need for specialized guidance for women navigating major life transitions such as divorce or widowhood. Throughout my practice, I became known for my ability to help clients establish financial independence while maintaining family harmony, a balance that often required subtle but firm boundary setting with well-meaning but overstepping family members. Specialized in helping older women maintain control of their assets while supporting their families in appropriate ways, particularly during transitional periods when vulnerability might lead to hasty decisions with long-term consequences. My approach always centered on creating balanced solutions that respected both family needs and the client's right to financial autonomy and dignity in their later years. This expertise, developed through hundreds of cases over 3 decades, would eventually become painfully relevant in my own life. I purchased our 2-story colonial home on Maple Street in 1977 with my late husband James when our son Richard was just 8 years old. We had spent years saving for this dream, a place with enough space for family gatherings, a garden where I could grow my prized roses, and a neighborhood where our son could thrive. The house, with its welcoming front porch and spacious kitchen, where we hosted countless family meals, became the backdrop for our most significant family milestones. This wasn't just a house, it was where James and I had created a life together. The kitchen, where I now stood after Richard's dismissive comment, was the same space where James had taught Richard to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, where we had celebrated birthdays and comforted each other through disappointments, and where I had sat alone for many nights after James passed away from heart failure 11 years ago. Every corner held memories. The living room fireplace where we hung stockings each Christmas, the back garden where James had built a treehouse that Richard's children now enjoyed during their visits, the study where I had worked late into the night building my financial advising business after becoming a widow, the marking of our family's height progression on the kitchen door frame, the dent in the hallway wall from Richard's teenage baseball mishap, the carefully maintained rose garden that had won community awards. All of these elements represented not just a property, but the physical manifestation of our family's story. After James passed away, I continued my financial advising practice while gradually transitioning toward retirement. The house became even more precious to me then, a tangible connection to the life we had built together, and the physical space where his presence still felt most immediate. I could feel him in every corner of that home, from the hand-built bookshelves, in the study to the workshop in the garage, where he had crafted furniture pieces that still adorned our rooms. During this period, my professional specialty evolved to focus specifically on helping widowed women create thoughtful financial plans that preserved both their assets and their independence. Having experienced firsthand the emotional complexity of maintaining a family home alone, I understood both the financial considerations and the deep emotional attachments involved. My approach centered on balancing reasonable family expectations with the fundamental rights of older women to maintain control of assets they had worked a lifetime to acquire. Richard earned his MBA from Eastridge Business School and built a successful marketing firm, a career path I supported both emotionally and financially. James and I had covered his graduate school tuition completely, wanting him to begin his professional life without educational debt. When he married Stephanie Baker, a real estate agent from a local family with social ambitions beyond their financial means, I welcomed her into our family despite noticing her somewhat materialistic nature and the subtle way she often redirected conversations toward appearances and status. They settled in Lakewood Heights, an exclusive suburb 30 minutes from my home, in a house that stretched their budget considerably. Their lifestyle quickly became centered around maintaining an image of affluence, country club memberships, and connections with Stephanie's extensive network of socially prominent friends. Our relationship remained cordial, though not as warm, as I might have wished. Sunday dinners at my home became monthly events rather than weekly traditions, and phone calls grew briefer and more focused on logistics than genuine connection. I attributed these natural shifts to their busy lives and their children, Emma and Lucas, now teenagers with packed schedules of activities carefully selected to enhance their college applications. While I sometimes missed the closer relationship we had enjoyed when Richard was younger, I understood that families evolve and tried to appreciate the time we did share without resentment for what had changed. The first warning signs appeared 3 years ago during a summer barbecue at my home. Stephanie arrived with what she called renovation ideas that she presented with surprising authority over dessert, while we were still enjoying the homemade blueberry cobbler I had prepared from berries picked in my garden. "Margaret," she began in the confident voice she often used when sharing her carefully formed opinions, "we've been researching ways to update the house. The traditional colonial style is charming in a nostalgic way, but it's time to modernize for today's needs and aesthetic standards." She displayed photographs of contemporary open-concept interiors from home design magazines, spaces with minimalist furnishings, gray walls, and none of the warm wood elements that characterized my home. "We're thinking about removing some walls downstairs to create an open floor plan, updating to stainless appliances, and converting James's workshop to a home gym." "That's an interesting perspective," I responded, surprised by the presumption. Underlying her presentation. "But I'm quite fond of the house as it is. James built these cabinets himself, and his workshop holds tremendous sentimental value beyond its practical purpose." Richard looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and avoiding eye contact as Stephanie leaned forward, her tone becoming more insistent. "Sentiment is lovely, Margaret, but practicality matters too. The kitchen is outdated with those wood countertops. The separate dining room concept is from another era, and frankly, the whole place could use a refresh if you want Emma and Lucas to enjoy visiting as they get older. Teenagers have different expectations than we did at their age." Her framing of my beloved home as outdated and potentially unappealing to the grandchildren revealed a concerning disconnect in how we viewed this space. More troubling was the assumption that at 70, my aesthetic preferences and emotional attachments should be secondary to their modernization vision, despite my continued ownership of the property and the lifetime of memories embedded in its current form. "I appreciate your thoughts," I said carefully, using the measured tone I had often employed in sensitive client discussions. "But any significant changes would need much more consideration. This place holds 45 years of memories. In its current form, James and I created each element with specific intention." Stephanie seemed ready to press further, but Richard placed a restraining hand on her arm, a gesture I recognized from countless financial mediations as signaling a strategic retreat rather than genuine agreement. "Of course, Mom. It's entirely your decision. We're just sharing some ideas for the future when you might not want to handle all the maintenance yourself." This reference to my potential inability to handle the property's maintenance, despite my continued vigor and the reliable handyman service I had used for years, introduced another concerning element: the implication that age inevitably diminished capability regardless of individual circumstance or demonstrated competence. Over the following months, casual conversations increasingly referenced friends who had modernized their family homes, or articles about making traditional spaces work for contemporary living. Each comment contained subtle messaging about the supposed outdatedness of maintaining my home in its original state, and implied wisdom of adapting to what Stephanie called current design trends. The Hendersons just completed their home renovation, Stephanie mentioned during one Sunday dinner at their house. They removed all the walls downstairs and created this gorgeous open-concept space. Their home value increased by 30%, and now they host the neighborhood gatherings since they have the most updated space. I'm glad for the Hendersons if that arrangement suits their needs, I would respond, maintaining polite firmness. But I've never viewed my home primarily as an investment property. It's our family home, not a showcase. Its purpose has always been to provide comfortable living space, not generate optimal resale value. These exchanges established a concerning pattern that my professional experience helped me recognize: persistent pressure framed as helpful suggestions, modernization arguments presented as practical wisdom, and my preferences implicitly characterized as outdated sentimentality that stood in the way of progress and optimal utilization. Though I recognized these tactics from my professional practice helping clients resist similar pressure from family members, I struggled to accept their emergence in my relationship with Richard and Stephanie. What I didn't fully appreciate during this period were the financial pressures developing beneath their carefully maintained appearance of affluence. Through casual mentions and community connections, I pieced together a troubling picture that helped explain their sudden, intense interest in my home's potential. Richard's marketing firm had faced significant setbacks when two major clients downsized their contracts, resulting in reduced income that hadn't been matched by any reduction in their lifestyle obligations. Their mortgage on the extensively renovated Lakewood Heights home stretched their budget considerably, having upgraded to a larger property in a more prestigious neighborhood than their finances comfortably allowed. Additionally, private school tuition for both children at Westlake Academy, plus summer programs, family vacations to exclusive destinations, and the extensive extracurricular activities Stephanie insisted were essential for competitive college applications had created substantial additional financial strain. These circumstances didn't justify their increasing pressure regarding my home, but they provided important context for their sudden interest in maximizing its potential through renovations that would make it suitable for eventual sale, a purpose entirely contrary to the family home James and I had explicitly created. Key situation reached a critical turning point during a family dinner at my home 2 years ago. After we had finished the meal and moved to the living room for coffee, Richard and Stephanie exchanged meaningful glances before Richard cleared his throat in the way he always did before making a prepared presentation. "Mom, we've been talking with our financial advisor about our long-term family strategy," he began, his practiced marketing voice activating as though addressing a client rather than his mother. One thing that came up was the house's ownership structure. "We think it makes sense to add my name to the deed now, while you're healthy and fully in control of the process. It would simplify inheritance issues later and potentially provide some tax advantages that our accountant has identified," Stephanie quickly added, leaning forward with the engaged expression she employed when closing real estate deals. "It's really about protection and planning, Margaret. Adding Richard to the deed would protect the property for future generations while allowing you to maintain lifetime usage rights without concern for future complications. It's what many forward-thinking families are doing with their homes these days, creating structures that ensure smooth transitions across generations." The request triggered immediate warning signals based on my extensive professional experience. In my practice, I had encountered numerous cases where adding children to property deeds, while theoretically designed for orderly succession, often created problematic power dynamics and sometimes led to the gradual marginalization of the original owner's authority regarding property decisions. However, they presented this as a minor administrative adjustment rather than the significant legal change it represented. "I'm quite familiar with property titling options," I reminded them, my financial advisor instincts fully awakening despite the family setting. Joint ownership can certainly be useful in some situations, but it also fundamentally changes ownership dynamics in ways that aren't always apparent initially. Many of my clients have had mixed experiences with joint ownership arrangements, particularly when differing visions for the property emerge later. "This would be different," Richard assured me with the confidence of someone who believed his marketing expertise trumped my 30 years of specialized financial practice. "You'd still be the primary decision maker. Nothing would change in terms of your enjoyment or control of the property. It's purely a legal structure to protect the house's future in our family while optimizing the tax situation." As they continued explaining the supposed benefits with carefully prepared talking points that sounded rehearsed, I found myself weighing my professional knowledge against my desire to maintain family harmony and avoid conflict that might damage my relationship with my grandchildren. After 3 decades guiding clients through similar situations, I now face the emotional complexity of balancing property rights against family expectations in my own life, a challenge made infinitely more difficult by the personal attachments involved. "Let me review the specifics before making any decisions," I suggested, needing time and space to consider appropriate protections outside the pressure of their dual presentation. "I'll want to consult with my colleague Sarah Mitchell, who specializes in estate planning even more specifically than my practice has. This isn't a decision to make without careful consideration of all implications." They seemed satisfied with this deferral, though Stephanie's parting comment, "It really is the most sensible approach, Margaret. All our friends with family homes are implementing similar arrangements," carried undertones of the patronizing attitude I had often helped elderly clients resist when family members attempted to position age-appropriate caution as irrational, resistance to sensible arrangements that primarily benefited others. The following week, I met with Sarah in her office to discuss my options. Her concern after reviewing the situation mirrored my own professional instincts, though her specialization in estate law provided additional insights I valued. "Based on what you've described, I'm seeing some red flags that warrant careful consideration," she warned after reviewing my notes on their proposal. When adult children initiate title changes to properties they don't yet own, particularly with this level of persistence, it often indicates plans for gradual control assumption rather than simple estate planning. Their emphasis on modernization and market value suggests they're viewing the property fundamentally differently than you do, as an asset to be optimized rather than a family home to be preserved. This assessment confirmed my concerns while providing the objective professional perspective I needed to make decisions based on legal reality rather than emotional complexity. Despite this clear professional advice, the subtle but persistent pressure from Richard and Stephanie during subsequent family gatherings created emotional challenges that were difficult to navigate, even with my financial background. After several weeks of what felt like constant discussion, where every family interaction somehow returned to the deed transfer proposal, I decided on a compromise that would maintain family peace while incorporating crucial protections I knew were necessary based on my professional experience with similar situations. Instead of adding Richard to the deed, I would update my will and estate plan to include specific provisions regarding the house. This compromise seemed to address their concern about inheritance planning while allowing me to maintain full ownership and decision-making authority during my lifetime. Working closely with Sarah over several detailed sessions, I created estate documents that included standard provisions regarding property inheritance, but also inserted a specially crafted clause that would prove crucial years later. The inheritance of the property at 724 Maple Street by Richard Wilson is contingent upon demonstrated respect for Margaret Wilson's autonomy and property rights during her lifetime. Any pattern of behavior attempting to control property decisions, pressure for premature property transfer, or disrespect of Margaret's position as homeowner shall trigger alternative distribution of said property according to the secondary provisions outlined in Section 8 of this document. This clause, which Sarah described as elegantly protective without appearing confrontational, created an important safety mechanism should Richard's behavior ever cross boundaries regarding my property rights. I insisted this clause be included in the finalized documents, which Richard reviewed after I explained my decision to update my estate plan rather than change the current deed. I've decided that maintaining the current deed while updating my estate plan better serves everyone's interests, I explained when presenting my decision. This preserves clear ownership during my lifetime while addressing the inheritance concerns you raised. Sarah has helped me create comprehensive provisions that ensure the property transfers appropriately when the time comes. Richard seemed slightly disappointed, but accepted this alternative, particularly after I emphasized the inheritance protections included in the new estate plan. I suppose that addresses the main concern about eventual transition, he acknowledged. As long as the inheritance path is clear, the timing isn't the primary issue. Stephanie appeared less satisfied with this compromise, but maintained a polite facade as she asked questions about the estate plan's provisions. Does this new plan address potential tax implications? Our financial advisor mentioned significant advantages to making changes sooner rather than later. The plan includes tax-optimized transfer provisions, I explained, using the professional knowledge that had guided clients through similar situations for decades. Sarah has incorporated several strategies that preserve tax benefits without requiring immediate title changes. Her specialized expertise in this area actually identified approaches your advisor may not have considered. This reference to specialized expertise beyond what their advisor had suggested seemed to temporarily mute further objections, though I noticed Stephanie's expression suggested continued calculation rather than genuine acceptance. The conversation shifted to other topics, but I sensed this matter wasn't fully resolved despite the apparent compromise. For nearly a year afterward, our family relationship continued with surface harmony that masked growing tensions regarding the house. Sunday dinners maintained their traditional form, though I noticed gradual changes in how decisions were communicated rather than discussed. Stephanie began referring to Mom's old house in conversations with friends and making subtle references to when we update the place. Small suggestions appeared with increasing frequency. A comment about how removing a wall would open up the space. Observations about how the master bedroom would make a perfect home office once it's redesigned. Casual mentions of which furniture pieces might work in our house and which should be donated when the time comes. I accommodated these subtle shifts, valuing family harmony above confrontation, regarding comments that could be interpreted charitably as simply conversational rather than presumptive. The grandchildren were growing into teenagers with their own interests, and maintaining their connection to the family home seemed worth the occasional discomfort of hearing Stephanie discuss necessary updates when they thought I wasn't listening, or finding her rearranging my kitchen cabinets to improve the flow during family gatherings. Then came the Thanksgiving dinner that shattered this fragile equilibrium and revealed the true nature of their long-term intentions regarding both my home and my place within the family structure. I had spent 3 days preparing for Thanksgiving, determined to create a special experience for the family despite increasingly troubling dynamics. The menu featured James's traditional recipes, his apple and sausage stuffing, cranberry relish with orange zest, and sweet potato casserole with the pecan topping that Richard had loved since childhood. I had polished the sterling silver that had belonged to my grandmother, set the dining room table with the fine china we used only for holidays, and arranged fresh flowers from my garden as the centerpiece. My back ached from the hours of preparation, but the sense of continuing family traditions that James and I had established decades earlier made the effort worthwhile. The house smelled of roasting turkey and spices, just as it had for the 45 Thanksgivings we had hosted in this dining room. As I put the finishing touches on the table setting, I felt James's presence particularly strongly, as though he were standing beside me, appreciating the care taken to maintain the holiday traditions that had meant so much to him. Richard, Stephanie, and the children arrived 45 minutes late, with no apology for the delay that had caused me to adjust cooking times to prevent the carefully prepared meal from drying out. Traffic was terrible, Stephanie mentioned casually as she handed me a store-bought pumpkin pie still in the bakery packaging. Despite her previous promise to bring the homemade apple pie that was part of our family tradition. This was all they had left at Westfield Bakery. I didn't have time to bake with my charity luncheon yesterday. I noticed she had found time for a fresh manicure, however, and was dressed in what appeared to be a new designer outfit rather than the casual family attire we typically wore for Thanksgiving. Richard immediately headed to the living room to check the football scores on television without offering to help with any preparations, while Emma and Lucas became absorbed in their phones without the usual hugs or greetings for their grandmother. "The house smells wonderful, Margaret," Stephanie offered, glancing around the dining room with an appraising eye that I recognized from her real estate showings, though it would be so much more convenient if we could see the television from the dining room. In modern open concepts, you can entertain while still keeping an eye on the game. I chose to focus on the first part of her comment rather than the implied criticism. "Thank you. I've tried to make everything special today. The turkey should be ready in about 15 minutes. Would you like to help me finish the gravy?" "Oh, I'm terrible with gravy," she replied with a laugh, backing toward the living room. "Richard needs me to discuss something about Lucas's college. Applications anyway. Just call us when everything's ready to serve." I found myself alone in the kitchen finalizing the meal preparation, making gravy, mashing potatoes, warming rolls, and transferring everything to serving dishes while the family relaxed in the living room. The television volume increased as Richard became more engaged in the football game, drowning out the classical music I had selected as background for our Thanksgiving dinner. When I finally announced that dinner was served, they meandered to the table at different intervals, Richard waiting for a commercial break, Stephanie finishing a phone call with one of her friends, and the teenagers reluctantly putting their devices aside after multiple reminders. No one offered to help carry the heavy serving dishes to the table. As we finally gathered around the table that had taken me hours to prepare, I waited for someone to notice the effort, to comment on the traditional foods made from James's recipes, or to express appreciation for the special touches I had incorporated. Instead, Richard immediately reached for the serving utensils with barely a glance at the presentation, while Stephanie critiqued the china pattern as very traditional, in a tone that clearly meant outdated. Had planned to observe our family tradition of sharing something we were grateful for before beginning the meal, just as James had always insisted upon. "Before we serve, perhaps we could each share something we're thankful for this year," I suggested. James always felt it was important to— "Mom, the game's on halftime now," Richard interrupted. "Let's just eat while I can actually enjoy the meal before the second half starts." Something shifted within me at that moment. A small but significant breach in the dam of patience I had maintained through years of increasing disregard. Still, I took a deep breath and proceeded with the tradition myself, hoping they might join in once I began. "I'll start then. I'm grateful for this family home where we can gather, and for the recipes James left us that keep his spirit with us during the holidays," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions rising within me. "That's nice, Mom," Richard replied without looking up from his phone, where he was checking sports scores. "I'm grateful for the Cowboys' defense finally showing up this season." Stephanie laughed appreciatively at his comment while helping herself to a generous portion of stuffing. "I'm thankful for the Westfield Country Club finally accepting our membership application. The networking opportunities are already proving valuable for my real estate business." The teenagers mumbled vague expressions of gratitude for their phones and gaming systems, and the meal proceeded with conversation that revolved primarily around Stephanie's social connections, Richard's business challenges, and the teenager's activities, none of which included substantive questions about my life or genuine engagement with family history. As the meal progressed, I noticed Richard had spilled wine on the tablecloth, the hand-embroidered linen that had been a wedding gift from my mother, without acknowledgement or apology. Stephanie had moved several of the serving dishes to make room for her water glass, disrupting the careful arrangement I had created, while commenting that family-style serving was so inefficient compared to the buffet approach her friends used for large gatherings. When I brought out James's traditional pecan pie, made from the recipe his grandmother had passed down through generations, Richard took a small portion while commenting, "This is good, Mom, but you should try the bourbon pecan pie from Westfield Bakery sometime. They use European butter that makes the crust incredible." The subtle dismissal of a family tradition that had always been celebrated as special cut deeper than he likely realized. Each small disregard accumulated like drops of water gradually eroding stone. Not catastrophic in any single instance, but devastating in their collective impact. As we finished the main course and I began to rise to clear the dishes, the moment arrived that would ultimately crystallize everything I had been feeling for months. Richard pushed back from the table, patted his stomach, and announced to everyone present, "Mom can clear the dishes while we watch the game. After all, she's used to doing housework," followed by a laugh as if he'd made a harmless joke. Table fell momentarily silent. Even Stephanie seemed to recognize he had crossed a line, glancing at me with a flicker of concern before composing her features into a neutral expression. The teenagers looked uncomfortable, but remained silent, while Richard appeared oblivious to the impact of his words, already turning toward the living room and the television. In that moment, decades of professional training in maintaining composure during difficult conversations served me well. Rather than the emotional reaction that might have emerged, I felt a strange clarity descend, as though viewing the situation from a professional distance despite its deeply personal nature. "Richard," I said quietly but firmly, "I am not the housekeeper. I am the homeowner who has spent 3 days preparing a special meal for this family gathering. If you're finished eating in my home, you're welcome to help clear the table before watching television." His expression registered surprise rather than remorse, not at the inappropriateness of his comment, but at my unexpected assertion of boundaries after years of accommodation. "It was just a joke, Mom," he replied with slight irritation. "Don't be so sensitive. We all know how much you enjoy taking care of the house." "What I enjoy is being respected in my own home," I responded, maintaining the calm tone I had used with clients facing difficult financial truths. "There's a significant difference between choosing to care for a home I love and being expected to serve as staff during a family gathering I've hosted." Stephanie intervened with the smooth social deflection she often employed when tensions emerged. "Margaret, Richard didn't mean anything by it. You know how men can be with their little jokes. Why don't I help you clear while Richard checks the score? The game is probably back on by now." Her attempt to minimize his comment while simultaneously facilitating his exit to the living room only highlighted the dynamic that had gradually emerged. My position within the family structure had been fundamentally redefined without my consent. From matriarch, whose home welcomed family members, to aging burden, whose domestic labor was expected, but whose personhood was increasingly optional to the gathering's success. "Actually," I said with the same professional clarity that had guided countless difficult client conversations, "I think we should address the pattern rather than the single comment. This isn't about clearing dishes. It's about the gradually shifting expectations regarding my role in this family and my position in my own home." Richard's expression darkened as he realized this wouldn't be resolved with the usual deflection and retreat. "Mom, you're making a Thanksgiving drama out of nothing." It was an offhand comment, not some deep statement about your position in the family, whatever that means. "It wasn't nothing," I replied, still maintaining composure while the dam inside me continued cracking. "It was the culmination of a pattern I've observed developing over the past several years. A pattern where my home has been gradually reframed as a space where my preferences are outdated. My attachment to family traditions is mere sentimentality, and my primary value seems to be the domestic service I provide rather than my presence as a person. Emma and Lucas exchanged uncomfortable glances, while Stephanie's practiced smile remained fixed in place, though her eyes revealed calculation rather than authentic engagement with the concerns I'd raised. Richard's expression shifted from irritation to the conflict management approach he used with difficult clients, a combination of apparent reasonableness masking fundamental dismissal. "Mom, you're obviously tired from all the preparation," he said in a tone one might use with an irrational child. "Why don't we table this discussion for another time when you're feeling more yourself? We can all help clean up later, but right now the second half is starting." His characterization of legitimate concern as emotional overreaction due to fatigue represented another familiar tactic I had observed countless times in financial consultations when adult children attempted to minimize their parents' valid concerns. The suggestion that I wasn't feeling myself when directly addressing disrespect carried the subtle implication that my normal state should be one of compliant accommodation rather than appropriate boundary setting. "I'm feeling perfectly myself," I replied with growing resolve, "which is why I'm addressing this now rather than continuing to accommodate behavior that has become increasingly concerning." The comment about housework wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a revealing statement about how my role in this family appears to be viewed. Richard sighed dramatically, glancing toward the living room where the sounds of the game resuming could be heard. "Fine, Mom. I apologize for the comment if it upset you. Now, can we please move on and enjoy what's left of the holiday?" His conditional apology, expressing regret for my reaction rather than his behavior, coupled with impatience to return to his preferred activity rather than engage meaningfully with the concern I'd raised, confirmed what my professional experience had taught me about such dynamics. This wasn't a communication issue to be resolved through clarification. It was a fundamental values disconnect being revealed through accumulated behaviors. "The apology is appreciated," I responded with professional courtesy rather than emotional relief. "But I'm now recognizing that today's experience reflects a pattern we need to address more substantially than a single conversation allows. I think it's best if we conclude today's gathering earlier than planned so I can have some time to consider next steps." This suggestion, that a family holiday might conclude early based on my preference rather than continuing indefinitely according to their expectations, seemed to genuinely shock both Richard and Stephanie. The idea that I might exercise decisive authority regarding my home's use appeared entirely unexpected despite my continued legal ownership of the property. "You want us to leave?" Stephanie asked incredulously. "Over a thoughtless comment?" "Margaret, that seems extremely disproportionate to the situation. It's not about the comment in isolation," I explained, drawing on decades of experience helping clients untangle complex family financial dynamics. "It's about recognizing patterns before they become further entrenched. Sometimes creating space for reflection proves more valuable than continuing interaction that reinforces problematic expectations." Richard's expression shifted from shock to the controlled anger I had occasionally witnessed during his teenage years when boundaries were enforced. "This is ridiculous. We drove 40 minutes to get here for a family Thanksgiving, and now you're asking us to leave because I made a joke about clearing dishes? This is exactly why we've suggested you might benefit from having company more often. Living alone has made you oversensitive to normal family interactions." This suggestion, that enforcing basic respect constituted oversensitivity, requiring increased family oversight rather than improved behavior, crystallized exactly the dynamic my professional experience had identified in countless similar situations. The framing of appropriate boundary setting as evidence of decline requiring intervention rather than as healthy self-advocacy deserving respect represented precisely the pattern I had helped many clients recognize and address. What I would benefit from I replied with the calm clarity I had maintained throughout challenging client situations for decades, is thoughtful consideration of how we proceed as a family with mutual respect as the foundation. That consideration requires some distance and reflection that today's gathering doesn't facilitate. As the uncomfortable silence stretched between us, Emma surprised everyone by speaking up. "Dad, Grandma's right. That comment was pretty disrespectful. You wouldn't talk to one of your clients that way, so why is it okay to talk to your mom? Like that?" Her unexpected perspective, viewing the situation through the lens of basic respect rather than family hierarchy, seemed to momentarily unbalance Richard's certainty. 17-year-old Emma had always been observant and ethically centered, qualities that reminded me of James's fundamental decency despite our sometimes different approaches to parenting. Stephanie quickly intervened, likely sensing Richard's momentary vulnerability. "Emma, adults sometimes have different perspectives on family dynamics that teens don't fully understand. This isn't about disrespect. It's about different generations having different communication styles." This attempt to reframe basic courtesy as a generational preference rather than a fundamental respect issue revealed much about the values being modeled for my grandchildren. The suggestion that respectful treatment became optional based on the recipient's age or relationship rather than representing consistent ethical practice. "Actually," Emma responded with remarkable poise, "we just had a whole unit in ethics class about how respect isn't generational. It's fundamental to all human dignity regardless of age or relationship. And making someone the butt of a joke about servitude isn't a communication style. It's just mean." Richard's expression darkened at this unexpected challenge from his daughter, while Lucas looked increasingly uncomfortable with the tension, retreating further into his silence. Stephanie maintained her social smile, though her eyes revealed calculation as she likely assessed how to regain control of the narrative. "I think we should respect Grandma's wishes," Emma continued, standing up from the table. "If she wants some space, we should give her that. We can help clean up and then head out." Her straightforward acceptance of my stated boundary, without attempting reinterpretation or manipulation, provided unexpected affirmation that the values James and I had tried to instill had taken root in at least one member of the next generation. The simplicity of her approach, acknowledging my expressed need without requiring debate or justification, highlighted how unnecessarily complicated the adults had made a fundamentally straightforward matter of basic respect. Richard appeared momentarily speechless at his daughter's perspective, while Stephanie's expression suggested she was recalculating her approach given this unexpected development. The momentary silence was broken by Lucas finally looking up from his phone to ask, "Does this mean we're not having dessert?" The simple question somehow diffused some of the tension, and I found myself smiling slightly despite the circumstances. "You're welcome to have pie before you leave, Lucas. I would never send anyone away from my table hungry, especially my grandson." The next 30 minutes unfolded in awkward efficiency as Emma helped clear dishes while Richard and Stephanie gathered their belongings with minimal conversation. Lucas ate his pie quickly at the kitchen counter rather than returning to the dining room. The carefully planned family Thanksgiving that should have lasted into evening concluded before 3 o'clock, with leftovers packed in containers that Stephanie accepted with professional politeness rather than genuine appreciation. As they prepared to leave, Richard made one final attempt to reframe the situation. "Mom, I hope you'll reconsider this overreaction once you've had some rest. Family. Holidays are about togetherness, even when there are minor misunderstandings." "What I'll be considering," I replied with the measured tone I had maintained throughout, "is how we move forward in ways that ensure mutual respect rather than continued accommodation of problematic patterns. I'll call you next week after I've had time to reflect on next steps." Emma gave me a genuine hug before leaving, whispering, "I'm sorry, Grandma. That wasn't okay." Her simple acknowledgement provided unexpected emotional ballast amid the turbulent family dynamics. As their car pulled away from the house that had witnessed 45 Thanksgiving gatherings, I closed the door and stood in the silent entryway, surrounded by the home James and I had created together. The quiet felt simultaneously painful and clarifying, a physical manifestation of the emotional space needed to assess the situation with professional objectivity, despite its deeply personal nature. Moving slowly through rooms that held decades of memories, I found myself in James's study, where his photograph sat on the desk I still used for household management. "Well," I said aloud to his image, "that certainly wasn't the Thanksgiving we planned all those years ago when we bought this house." In that moment of quiet communion with James's memory, something shifted within me. Grief transforming into clarity, hurt hardening into resolve. The financial advisor who had spent 3 decades helping women maintain dignity and autonomy during life transitions would now apply that professional wisdom to her own most challenging case. Making tea in the kitchen where holiday chaos had reigned just hours earlier, I found myself moving with the purposeful calm that had characterized my professional approach to complex financial situations. Rather than dwelling in emotional reaction to Richard's comment, I began methodically analyzing the pattern it revealed and the options available for addressing the fundamental dynamics, rather than merely the presenting symptoms. By evening, as I sat in James's favorite chair watching darkness settle over the garden he had designed decades earlier, my professional training had transformed personal hurt into strategic thinking. The expertise I had developed over 30 years helping clients navigate complex family financial dynamics would now serve in my own defense against the very patterns I had spent a career helping others recognize and address. With resolute determination, I reached for the phone and called Sarah Mitchell at her home number, something I did only rarely despite our friendship. "I need your help," I explained, summarizing the Thanksgiving incident and subsequent conversation. "The pattern we discussed last year has progressed to the point where decisive action has become necessary, rather than merely preventative." Sarah's response was immediate and resolute. "I was afraid this might happen based on what you've described previously. Pull out your estate documents and review the special clause we included, the one about demonstrated respect being a condition of inheritance. This Thanksgiving incident provides exactly the kind of documentation that provision was designed to address." As I retrieved the documents from my home safe and reviewed the carefully crafted language I had insisted upon including last year, I felt something shift within me, uncertainty transforming into determination, discomfort hardening into resolve. The financial expertise I had used throughout my career to protect clients' autonomy and dignity would now be employed in defense of my own rightful place within a family structure that had gradually reframed my role from matriarch to servant, without my consent. The clause read exactly as I remembered drafting it. "The inheritance of the property at 724 Maple Street by Richard Wilson is contingent upon demonstrated respect for Margaret Wilson's autonomy and property rights during her lifetime. Any pattern of behavior attempting to control property decisions, pressure for premature property transfer, or disrespect of Margaret's position as homeowner shall trigger alternative distribution of said property according to the secondary provisions outlined in Section 8 of this document." Richard and Stephanie had clearly miscalculated significantly in believing that age had diminished either my capacity to recognize disrespect or my determination to maintain my rightful place in a family structure I had helped create. The thoughtless comment about housework, intended as casual relegation to domestic service, would instead trigger the protective clause I had wisely inserted into my estate plan, a clause that would soon remind them exactly who had created the cherished family home they now took for granted. The morning after Thanksgiving, I awoke with the clarity that often follows difficult but necessary decisions. The initial shock and hurt had crystallized into focused resolve, transforming emotional reaction into strategic purpose. Decades of professional experience had taught me that emotional responses, while perfectly valid, rarely produce effective outcomes in family disputes, especially those involving members who have convinced themselves their actions are justified by concern rather than self-interest. As I prepared for my first formal meeting with Sarah Mitchell to discuss legal strategy, I methodically gathered materials that would form the foundation of our approach. The estate documents with my protective clause highlighted, a chronological journal I had maintained documenting the pattern of disrespect and control attempts, text messages and emails showing Richard and Stephanie's increasing references to when we update the house and renovation plans made without consultation, and photographs documenting the home's condition and meaningful features they had dismissed as merely outdated. Sarah's office, located in a renovated Victorian building downtown, had always represented a sanctuary of professional protection for vulnerable clients. Now, sitting across from her desk as a client rather than a colleague, I experienced firsthand the reassurance her methodical approach provided during crisis situations. "We need to move deliberately but quickly," Sarah advised after reviewing my documentation. "The Thanksgiving incident provides perfect triggering evidence for activating your contingency clause, but timing matters considerably in these situations. Once they realize the legal implications of their actions, they may attempt to backtrack with superficial politeness that technically satisfies the letter of the agreement while continuing the pattern of underlying disrespect." This insight reflected Sarah's specialized understanding of family estate disputes, the tactical retreats and strategic adjustments that often followed initial confrontation. Having witnessed countless similar situations from the professional side, I now appreciated the emotional complexity from the client perspective, balancing the determination to protect my autonomy against the heartache of confronting my own son's betrayal of basic respect. "What's our optimal approach?" I asked, deliberately adopting the analytical tone that had served me through countless complex financial negotiations, rather than allowing maternal disappointment to color my strategic thinking. "Two-pronged approach," Sarah replied, her efficient assessment reflecting our years of professional collaboration. "First, formal written notice activating the contingency clause, with documentation establishing the clear breach of the respect provision. Second, and this may surprise you, I believe you should consider selling the property rather than merely changing the inheritance structure." "Selling?" I asked, genuinely surprised by this suggestion. Despite the recent conflicts, I had never considered actually selling the family home that held so many memories. "Consider the underlying dynamics," Sarah explained, leaning forward with the focused intensity that made her such an effective estate attorney. "The contingency clause gives you legal protection regarding inheritance, but as long as you remain in the home, the pattern of pressure and disrespect is likely to continue or even escalate once they realize their inheritance is threatened. They've demonstrated that they view the property primarily as a future asset rather than your current home. Selling the house fundamentally changes that equation by removing the asset they've been positioning themselves to control." As she outlined this perspective, I found myself considering the home not just as the emotional repository of family memories, but as a financial asset that had inadvertently become the centerpiece of unhealthy family dynamics. Throughout my career, I had often advised clients to consider how certain assets, regardless of their emotional significance, sometimes became focal points for family conflict that undermined relationships rather than strengthening them. "The CI property has appreciated significantly since you and James purchased it," Sarah continued. "Maple Street has become one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city. Based on recent comparable sales, you're likely sitting on substantial equity that could be reinvested in a living arrangement better suited to your actual preferences rather than their expectations. More importantly, selling eliminates their ability to pressure you about property decisions, renovation plans, or eventual transfer." This analysis, cutting through emotional attachment to identify the practical advantages of a decisive financial move, reflected exactly the approach I had used throughout my career when helping clients navigate complex family property disputes. The home's substantial appreciation over 45 years had created significant financial value entirely separate from its emotional significance, providing options I hadn't previously considered fully. "There's another factor to consider," Sarah added with the careful precision that characterized her professional approach. The contingency clause in your estate plan is powerful, but challenging such provisions can lead to prolonged legal proceedings that consume both emotional energy and financial resources. Selling the property effectively renders that potential conflict moot. By converting the asset to liquid funds, you can distribute according to your wishes without the specific legal complications attached to real property. As I considered this perspective, memories of similar client situations filtered through my professional experience. I had often advised women facing disrespect from adult children that maintaining control sometimes required decisive action rather than incremental boundary setting that invited continued testing and erosion. The house had become the battlefield for a larger conflict about my autonomy and dignity as I aged. A conflict that might be more effectively resolved by changing the terrain entirely rather than continuing to defend increasingly contested ground. I need time to consider such a significant step, I said finally, recognizing both the strategic wisdom and emotional magnitude of potentially selling the home I had shared with James for decades. Of course, Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity beyond mere legal considerations. While you're reflecting on that possibility, I'll prepare the formal notice regarding the contingency clause activation. That establishes the legal foundation regardless of what you ultimately decide. About selling, Judge Caroline Reynolds is currently handling the probate calendar, and she has a strong record of enforcing explicit estate provisions according to their clear language, rather than allowing family dynamics to override written agreements. The mention of Judge Reynolds, who had actually attended several of my financial seminars for women years earlier, reminded me of the professional network I had built throughout my career. This network, cultivated through decades of ethical practice and collaborative problem-solving, represented a resource Richard and Stephanie had clearly underestimated when calculating their leverage in this situation. Over the next 48 hours, I moved through necessary preparations with the efficiency honed through decades of professional crisis management. I contacted Helena Cruz, a respected real estate appraiser I had worked with frequently, who conducted a comprehensive property valuation establishing the home's current market value at $875,000, more than 15 times what James and I had paid in 1977. This valuation cast Richard and Stephanie's persistent interest in the property in a particularly troubling light, suggesting financial motivations far exceeding legitimate concerns about my living arrangements. I also consulted with Marcus Taylor, a financial planner I had often collaborated with before retirement, regarding investment options should I decide to sell the property. His analysis confirmed that even after purchasing a comfortable condominium in the Riverside district I had always admired, I would have substantial remaining capital to invest for additional income and eventual distribution according to my wishes, rather than Richard's expectations. Most revealing was the neighborhood research Sarah's assistant conducted, which discovered that Stephanie had recently listed and sold 3 modernized family homes within 5 miles of my address, properties where older owners had sold to younger families who completed extensive renovations. Her real estate website specifically highlighted her expertise in helping clients transition historic properties to meet contemporary market expectations, language that cast her persistent renovation suggestions in a more calculated light than mere aesthetic preference. These discoveries provided critical context for their escalating efforts to influence my property decisions, not simply family dynamics, but apparent business plans requiring my compliance to implement. The financial motivations explained the peculiar timing of their increased criticism of my home's outdated features during a hot real estate market where modernized properties in established neighborhoods commanded premium prices. Meanwhile, Sarah had prepared formal legal notice establishing the triggering of the contingency clause, with supporting documentation establishing clear breach of the respect provision. The notice was precise and unemotional, stating simply that the condition for alternative distribution had been triggered by documented pattern of disrespect, including but not limited to the incident on November 25, 2024, when Richard Wilson publicly characterized his mother as household help rather than homeowner during a family gathering at her residence. The document concluded by stating that, per the explicit terms of Section 4, Paragraph 7 of the estate plan dated May 10, 2023, inheritance of the property at 724 Maple Street shall now proceed according to the secondary provisions outlined in Section 8 of said document. The morning Sarah planned to deliver this notice, I received an unexpected text message from Richard. "Mom, been thinking about Thanksgiving." I admit my comment was thoughtless. "Let's have dinner this weekend to clear the air. Stephanie found a great caterer so you won't need to cook." This sudden outreach, arriving just 4 days after the incident and following my conversation with Sarah, suggested they had somehow become concerned about potential consequences and were attempting to neutralize the situation with superficial reconciliation without addressing the underlying pattern of disrespect. "This is exactly the tactical retreat I anticipated," Sarah noted when I forwarded her the message. "They've realized something might actually happen this time instead of you simply accommodating as usual, and they're trying to reset to the status quo before consequences materialize. The offer to bring a caterer rather than cook yourself would be laughable if it weren't so revealing about their fundamental misunderstanding of the actual issue." Despite this legal reality, the message presented a tactical decision. Proceed immediately with formal notice of the contingency clause activation, or engage in one more conversation to gather additional evidence of their perspectives while maintaining the element of surprise regarding legal action. After careful consideration with Sarah, we decided on the latter approach. I would accept the dinner invitation as a final opportunity to assess whether any genuine recognition of the problematic patterns might be possible before proceeding with more formal measures. "This approach gives us 2 key advantages," Sarah explained. "First, additional evidence of their true perspectives regarding both the property and your position within the family, which strengthens our documentation, regardless of next steps. Second, it prevents them from claiming you rejected reasonable reconciliation attempts before pursuing legal action." When Sunday evening arrived, I prepared myself emotionally for what would likely be a pivotal conversation in our family relationship. Rather than hosting at my home as usual, Richard had suggested Riverside Bistro, an upscale restaurant overlooking the river that Stephanie frequently mentioned as popular among her more affluent clients. The choice of venue seemed calculated to place our conversation in public space where emotional expressions would necessarily be constrained by social propriety. I arrived precisely on time to find Richard and Stephanie already seated, with settings for only 3 people. "The kids had previous commitments," Stephanie explained when I inquired about Emma and Lucas's absence. This selective attendance, excluding the family members who had witnessed the Thanksgiving incident directly, suggested careful stage management rather than genuine family reconciliation. Richard began with practiced contrition that echoed the crisis management approach he used with disgruntled marketing clients. "Mom, I want to apologize again for my thoughtless comment at Thanksgiving. It was inappropriate and disrespectful. I was caught up in the football game and spoke without thinking about how it would sound." This characterization, framing systematic disrespect as momentary thoughtlessness caused by distraction, reflected the superficial accountability I had often observed in family conflicts, where fundamental patterns went unaddressed while specific incidents received tactical apologies aimed at restoring favorable dynamics rather than creating meaningful change. "I appreciate your acknowledgement that the comment was disrespectful," I responded, maintaining the professional composure that had served me through decades of difficult financial consultations. However, my concern extends beyond that specific moment to the pattern it represents. A pattern where my role has increasingly been defined by what services I provide, rather than the respect I deserve as both your mother and a person in my own right. Richard's expression shifted subtly. the practiced contrition giving way to barely concealed impatience, typical when performative accountability failed to immediately restore comfortable dynamics. "Mom, you're making this much bigger than it actually is." One thoughtless comment doesn't constitute a pattern that undermines our entire relationship. Families sometimes say things they don't mean in the moment. That's just part of being close enough to occasionally step on each other's toes. Stephanie quickly interjected with the smooth social management that characterized her professional approach to difficult real estate negotiations. "Margaret, we all value everything you do for the family. Richard sometimes expresses himself poorly, but his heart is in the right place. We've been concerned that you might be feeling overwhelmed with maintaining such a large home by yourself, which is why we've suggested updates that would make things more manageable." This strategic reframing, casting control attempts as concern while positioning my desire for respect as emotional overreaction, represented exactly the manipulative dynamics I had helped countless clients recognize throughout my career. The suggestion that property decisions should be guided by their assessment of my capabilities rather than my expressed preferences revealed the fundamental disconnect that had created our current conflict. I'd like to address that specific point. I replied with the calm clarity I had maintained during challenging client situations for decades. The running theme through many of our conversations over the past few years has been your perception that I need assistance making appropriate decisions about my home. Assistance that inevitably aligns with your preferences rather than mine. This positioning of yourselves as better qualified to determine what's best for my living situation is precisely the problem, not the solution. Richard's expression darkened at this direct naming of the dynamic, while Stephanie maintained her professional smile, though her eyes revealed calculation rather than genuine engagement. "Mom, our suggestions about the house come from genuine concern about its maintenance requirements as you get older," Richard insisted, doubling down on the framing I had just identified. The stairs, the yard work, the outdated kitchen, these all represent potential challenges that we're trying to address proactively rather than waiting for problems to develop. And yet, I observed with the analytical precision that had characterized my professional practice, these concerns consistently align with changes that would increase the property's market value rather than specifically addressing my actual needs or preferences. The open concept you've repeatedly suggested would remove walls I appreciate for displaying family photographs. The kitchen renovation would eliminate cabinets James built that hold significant emotional value. The master bedroom conversion would transform my personal space into a home office or guest suite I have no need for. Stephanie's practiced composure wavered slightly at this explicit connection between their helpful suggestions and increased market value. "Property improvements benefit everyone," she countered, shifting to her real estate expertise rather than family concern framing. "Updates that align with current market preferences protect your investment while creating more functional spaces. It's simply practical financial planning." "And there we have it," I noted quietly, recognizing the fundamental values disconnect that no amount of tactical conversation would resolve. "You view my home primarily as a financial asset whose value should be maximized according to current market preferences. I view it as the personal space I created with James, filled with elements that hold meaning beyond their market value. Neither perspective is inherently wrong, but the persistent attempt to impose yours while dismissing mine is precisely what created our current situation." Richard's expression reflected growing frustration as his prepared reconciliation script failed to produce the expected return to comfortable dynamics where his preferences held primary influence. "Mom, you're being unnecessarily adversarial about simple home improvement suggestions. This rigid attachment to keeping everything exactly as it was when Dad was alive isn't healthy. Life evolves, houses change, families adapt. That's normal. Progression, not some calculated attempt to control your life." This characterization, framing appropriate boundary maintenance as rigid resistance to natural change, represented another manipulative tactic I had observed throughout my career. The suggestion that protecting meaningful elements of my home constituted unhealthy attachment rather than legitimate preference, revealed the fundamental disregard for my autonomy that had triggered the current conflict. What's not healthy, I responded with calm conviction, is dismissing someone's expressed preferences about their own living space as mere sentimentality while positioning your different preferences as objective improvement. The house is my home, not an investment property awaiting optimization for eventual sale. The persistent pressure to treat it as the latter rather than the former has created this situation, not my desire to maintain elements that hold personal meaning. As dinner concluded with superficial pleasantries masking fundamental disagreement, I recognized with clarity born from decades of professional experience that no conversation would resolve the underlying values disconnect that had created our conflict. Richard and Stephanie viewed my home through the lens of potential market value and future acquisition, while I experienced it as personal space deserving protection from unwanted transformation regardless of financial considerations. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss these matters directly, I said as we prepared to leave the restaurant, maintaining the professional courtesy that had characterized my approach despite growing certainty regarding necessary next steps. This conversation has provided important clarity about our different perspectives on both my home and my position within the family structure. Richard appeared momentarily uncertain how to interpret this statement, whether as movement toward reconciliation or further evidence of unresolved conflict. "So, we're good now?" he asked finally, revealing the transactional approach to relationships that characterized his professional life more than his personal connections. "We can put Thanksgiving behind us and move forward normally?" "What I've put behind me," I clarified with gentle firmness, "is any uncertainty about whether our current family dynamic requires significant change rather than minor adjustment. This evening has confirmed that more substantial recalibration is necessary rather than simply returning to patterns that have proven increasingly problematic." Stephanie's expression revealed immediate calculation, the real estate professional's instinct for recognizing when negotiations had shifted unfavorably. "What exactly does that mean, Margaret?" "Substantial recalibration sounds unnecessarily dramatic for what should be normal family evolution. It means I'll be making decisions that establish clearer boundaries regarding both my home and my position within the family," I explained with the straightforward approach I had always advocated for clients facing similar situations. "Those decisions will reflect my values and preferences, rather than accommodating pressure that undermines my autonomy." As we parted with perfunctory hugs that belied the tension beneath surface civility, I experienced the bittersweet clarity familiar from my professional practice, certainty regarding necessary boundaries tempered by awareness of relationship costs that such boundaries sometimes required. Throughout my career, I had witnessed countless situations where maintaining dignity and autonomy required difficult choices that privileged self-respect over comfortable but ultimately destructive accommodation. The following morning, I called Sarah from the peaceful quiet of my garden, where early spring bulbs James and I had planted decades earlier were just beginning to emerge from winter dormancy. "I've made my decision," I informed her with the certainty that came from both professional wisdom and personal clarity. "I'll be selling the house." Sarah's momentary silence conveyed understanding of both the decision's significance and the careful consideration behind it. "Are you certain?" she asked finally. "While I believe it's the strategically sound option, I recognize the emotional weight of this choice given the home's history." "I'm certain," I confirmed, watching a robin build her nest in the maple tree James had planted the year we moved in. "What I've realized is that the house has become a battleground that distorts our relationship rather than enhancing it. The memories I cherish aren't contained in the physical structure, but in what James and I created together. Values, traditions, and family connections that should transcend specific property. This realization, that preserving meaningful memories sometimes required releasing physical spaces that had become focal points for damaging dynamics, reflected wisdom I had often shared with clients facing similar transitions. Throughout my career, I had observed how certain properties sometimes transformed from nurturing homes into contested territories where ongoing conflict undermined the very family connections they were intended to support. Additionally, I continued, with the analytical clarity that had guided my professional practice, I recognize that remaining in this house maintains the power dynamic they've established, where my continued residence becomes positioned as evidence of needing their oversight rather than exercising my preference. Selling creates definitive change that establishes both financial and emotional autonomy in ways merely modifying the estate plan wouldn't accomplish. Sarah's response reflected appreciation for the strategic wisdom underlying this decision. The property's substantial appreciation provides significant financial leverage that changes the fundamental dynamic. Converting the asset to liquid funds creates options that simply maintaining ownership while changing inheritance provisions wouldn't provide. With this decision made, we developed comprehensive implementation strategy that would maintain the element of surprise while establishing clear legal documentation. Sarah would deliver the formal notice regarding contingency clause activation as originally planned, establishing legal foundation for the changed inheritance structure regardless of the property's ultimate disposition. Meanwhile, I would contact Helena Cruz to list the property once necessary preparations had been completed. One important consideration, Sarah noted during our planning session. The timing of listing versus formal notification could significantly impact both legal and relationship outcomes. If they receive legal notice before observing any preparation for sale, they'll likely focus energy on challenging the contingency clause activation rather than addressing the more fundamental property disposition. This strategic insight, anticipating how sequence of actions would affect response patterns, reflected the sophisticated understanding of family dynamics that had made Sarah such an effective estate attorney. Throughout my career, I had observed how timing often proved crucial in complex financial situations where emotional reactions could sabotage rational response if not carefully managed. I believe we should proceed with property preparation immediately but discreetly, I decided after considering various approaches. Once the house is ready for market, but before actual listing, deliver the formal notice. This sequence establishes legal foundation while maintaining flexibility regarding actual sale timing based on their response to the notice. Over the next 3 weeks, I methodically prepared the property for potential sale with the same organized efficiency that had characterized my professional approach to complex financial situations. Working with a trusted home stager recommended by Helena, I arranged for professional photography, minor repairs that would enhance market appeal, and selective updating that preserved meaningful elements while addressing legitimate maintenance concerns. Throughout this process, I carefully documented items of sentimental value that would move with me regardless of the property's sale. James's handcrafted furniture, family photographs, and artwork, the special collections we had built, together over decades of shared life. This deliberate inventory, separating physical assets with financial value from personal treasures with emotional significance, helped clarify which elements of our family legacy truly required preservation beyond specific property ownership. When preparations were complete, but before formal listing, Sarah delivered the legal notice to Richard's office as planned, establishing official documentation of the contingency clause activation. The notice clearly cited the Thanksgiving incident as triggering event, while referencing the broader pattern of disrespect it represented, ensuring comprehensive legal foundation regardless of potential challenges. Richard's response came within hours, an angry phone call that revealed genuine shock rather than tactical adjustment. "Mom, what is this legal document Sarah Mitchell delivered to my office? Something about contingency clauses and alternative inheritance provisions? This is completely unnecessary escalation of what should be normal family discussion." His characterization, framing, formal protection of my clearly established rights as unnecessary escalation while positioning systematic disrespect as normal family discussion, revealed the fundamental disconnect that had necessitated legal intervention rather than continued conversation. The suggestion that documenting violations of explicitly defined behavioral expectations constituted overreaction rather than appropriate consequence demonstrated precisely the dismissive attitude the clause had been designed to address. The document reflects provisions we discussed when I updated my estate plan last year, I explained calmly, maintaining the professional composure that had served me through countless difficult financial conversations. The contingency clause regarding respectful treatment was explicitly included to protect against exactly the pattern that culminated in the Thanksgiving incident. This isn't escalation, but rather implementation of provisions that were established specifically for such circumstances. Richard's response shifted from indignation to the negotiation approach he employed with difficult business situations, a combination of implied concession with fundamental challenge of basic premises. Mom, if this is about Thanksgiving, I've already apologized for that comment. Taking drastic legal action over a single thoughtless remark seems extremely disproportionate given our years of supportive family relationship. This characterization, reducing systematic pattern to isolated incident while positioning formal consequences as disproportionate response, represented another manipulation tactic I had observed throughout my professional career. The suggestion that documented violation of explicitly defined conditions somehow constituted overreaction, rather than appropriate enforcement, revealed the entitlement perspective that had created our current conflict. This isn't about a single comment, I clarified with the precision I had maintained throughout my professional practice. The Thanksgiving incident represented culmination of a pattern explicitly described in the contingency clause you reviewed last year. The provision wasn't created in response to recent events, but rather established preventatively based on concerning patterns observed over time. After several minutes of increasingly frustrated attempts to reposition the situation as emotional overreaction rather than legitimate enforcement of documented provisions, Richard's approach shifted toward financial implications, the core concern that likely motivated his immediate response to the notice. So what exactly does this mean in practical terms? He asked finally. The document mentions alternative distribution, but doesn't specify details. Is this just legal positioning or actual change to inheritance arrangements? The details are outlined in Section 8 of the estate plan, I explained, maintaining factual precision rather than emotional engagement. The contingency clause activation means property inheritance proceeds according to alternative provisions rather than primary designation. Sarah can provide complete documentation regarding specific terms if you'd like to review them with your attorney. This reference to professional review rather than personal negotiation established appropriate boundaries regarding next steps, positioning, the matter within legal framework rather than emotional manipulation, where Richard typically maintained advantage. Throughout my career, I had observed how such positioning often shifted family dynamics from emotional pressure to factual consideration, creating space for more balanced engagement with difficult realities. The following morning, Richard arrived unannounced at my home, likely expecting to find me alone and potentially vulnerable to direct emotional appeal outside professional contexts. What he encountered instead was Helena Cruz conducting final measurements for the property listing, with professional photographer capturing exterior images for marketing materials. His expression registered genuine shock rather than tactical adjustment, the first indication that my decision to sell rather than merely modify inheritance provisions had completely surprised him despite the legal notice. Mom? What's happening here? Why is Helena measuring the living room? Are you actually selling the house? The incomprehension in his tone, genuine surprise that I might make significant property decisions without his input or approval, revealed the extent to which he had internalized assumption of control despite my continued legal ownership. The possibility that I might exercise independent authority regarding my own property appeared entirely unexpected, despite decades of professional financial expertise and clear legal rights. Yes, I've decided to sell, I confirmed calmly, introducing Helena as the listing agent I've engaged to market the property, rather than mutual acquaintance from professional circles. This framing, establishing clear business relationship rather than social connection, helped maintain appropriate boundaries regarding the transaction's professional nature. Richard's expression cycled through shock, anger, and calculation before settling into the conflict resolution approach he employed in high-stakes business negotiations. Mom, selling the family home is an extreme reaction to what should be resolvable family discussion. This property represents decades of family history and traditions. Making irreversible decisions during emotional upheaval rarely leads to optimal outcomes. This characterization, framing legitimate property decisions as emotional overreaction, while positioning himself as rational protector of family interests, represented another manipulation tactic I had observed throughout my professional career. The suggestion that exercising my clear legal rights somehow constituted impulsive reaction rather than deliberate choice revealed the fundamental disregard for my autonomy that had necessitated decisive action. This decision reflects careful consideration of both financial realities and relationship patterns, I explained with the analytical clarity that had guided my professional practice. The property has appreciated significantly since your father and I purchased it. Converting that appreciation to liquid assets creates options that continuing to maintain a single high-value property doesn't provide. Helena, recognizing the sensitive dynamics at play, discreetly moved to another room to continue her measurements, providing space for family conversation while maintaining professional presence that prevented escalation to inappropriate pressure. Her understanding of both professional boundaries and emotional complexities demonstrated exactly why I had selected her as listing agent, despite our long-standing professional relationship that might have created complications in less experienced hands. But why now? Richard persisted, shifting tactics from challenging the decision's legitimacy to questioning its timing. If this is about financial planning, we could have discussed options that preserve the property while addressing any concerns about liquidity or management. Selling without family consultation seems unnecessarily drastic. This framing, positioning family consultation as prerequisite for legitimate property decisions, revealed the underlying entitlement perspective that had created our current conflict. The suggestion that my independent choices required validation through family discussion rather than representing legitimate exercise of clear legal rights demonstrated precisely the controlling dynamic I had decided to address through decisive action rather than continued accommodation. The decision to sell reflects my assessment of both financial opportunities and personal preferences, I responded with calm confidence born from decades of professional expertise. The current market provides excellent conditions for maximizing return on a property that exceeds my current needs, while the equity provides options for establishing living arrangements better aligned with my actual preferences rather than others' expectations. As Richard processed this information, his expression revealed calculation. The marketing professional's instinct for identifying potential leverage when initial positioning failed. What about tax implications? The capital gains on a property held this long could be substantial without proper planning. At least consult with a financial advisor before making irrevocable decisions. This pivot, attempting to position himself as financial protector despite my 30-year career as financial advisor, would have been amusing in less emotional circumstances. The suggestion that I might require his guidance regarding tax implications of property disposition, despite having advised countless clients through similar transactions, revealed the profound disconnect between his perception of my capabilities and the professional reality that had shaped my career. I've completed comprehensive tax analysis with Marcus Taylor, I informed him, referencing the respected financial planner we both knew from professional circles. The property qualifies for significant exemptions based on long-term primary residence status, and the remaining tax liability has been incorporated into financial projections regarding net proceeds and subsequent investment strategy. This reference to specific professional consultation with respected expert Richard couldn't easily dismiss established appropriate boundaries regarding the transaction's financial aspects. Throughout my career, I had observed how such positioning often shifted family dynamics from emotional manipulation to factual consideration, creating space for more balanced engagement with difficult realities. As our conversation concluded without resolution, Richard's parting question revealed the fundamental self-interest underlying his concern about the property's disposition. Where will you live if you sell? You shouldn't make housing decisions without family input given your age and potential future needs. This framing, positioning my housing choices as requiring family oversight due to age rather than representing legitimate personal preference, crystallized exactly the controlling dynamic that had necessitated decisive action. The suggestion that 73 somehow diminished my capacity for independent decision-making despite continued demonstration of competence revealed the ageist assumptions underlying their approach to our relationship. I've identified several excellent options that better align with my actual preferences rather than others' expectations, I responded with the confident clarity that had characterized my professional practice. The significant equity from this property's appreciation provides financial flexibility that creates opportunities rather than limitations, precisely the position I advised clients to establish throughout my career. As Richard departed with clear frustration but without effective counter-strategy, I experienced the bittersweet certainty familiar from my professional practice. Confidence regarding necessary boundaries, tempered by awareness of relationship adjustments such boundaries sometimes required. Throughout my career, I had witnessed how establishing appropriate financial independence often necessitated weathering temporary relationship turbulence that ultimately created potential for more balanced connections based on mutual respect, rather than dependency or control. Within 3 days of Helena listing my property, we received 4 competitive offers, all significantly above asking price. The hot real estate market had created perfect conditions for selling a well-maintained family home in an established neighborhood, particularly one with the architectural character and mature landscaping mine offered. The winning bid came from a young professional couple with 2 small children who specifically valued the historic elements Richard and Stephanie had dismissed as outdated, particularly appreciating James's handcrafted cabinets and built-in bookshelves as features that distinguished the home from newer construction. They actually asked if the original wood countertops in the kitchen could remain rather than being replaced with granite, Helena reported with evident satisfaction after the final showing. They described the craftsmanship as irreplaceable and specifically mentioned how much they loved the sense of history and character throughout the house. Not everyone wants the same generic open concept that dominates current design. This validation, that the very elements Richard and Stephanie had persistently criticized as outdated were viewed as valuable by buyers willing to pay premium price, provided unexpected affirmation beyond mere financial return. The qualities they had dismissed as mere sentimentality represented genuine value to discerning purchasers who appreciated craftsmanship and character rather than merely following temporary design trends. The final sale price of $9,000 to $12,000, nearly $40,000 above the appraised value, represented extraordinary return on the $5,700 James and I had invested 45 years earlier. This appreciation created financial flexibility far exceeding what continued residence in a single high-value property would have provided, confirming the strategic wisdom of conversion to liquid assets, regardless of the family dynamics that had accelerated the decision's timing. With the sale moving toward closing, I focused on identifying my next residence, a process I approached with the same methodical thoroughness that had characterized my professional practice. Rather than rushing into another purchase, I arranged for short-term furnished accommodations in the Riverside district overlooking the park James and I had often visited on weekend mornings. This transitional housing provided comfortable space while I carefully evaluated options without pressure from either market timing or family expectations. The morning after accepting the offer, I called Sarah to update her on developments and discuss next steps regarding both legal matters and family communication. The house is under contract with excellent terms, I explained, sharing details of the sale agreement Helena had finalized. The buyers requested a 45-day closing to arrange financing, which provides sufficient time for thoughtful transition regarding both property disposition and family dynamics. Sarah's response reflected both professional satisfaction and personal concern, the balanced perspective that made her such an effective estate attorney. The financial outcome confirms the strategic wisdom of this decision, but I know the emotional aspects remain complex regardless of practical benefits. How are you feeling about this significant transition? This question, addressing emotional realities alongside financial considerations, represented the holistic approach we had both employed throughout our professional careers. Unlike Richard's persistent framing of my decisions as emotional reactions, requiring his rational oversight, Sarah recognized that legitimate emotions could coexist with strategic thinking without diminishing either aspect. I'm experiencing a combination of liberation and sadness, I acknowledged, appreciating the opportunity for nuanced reflection rather than simplified positioning. Sadness for the memories the house contains, but liberation from the increasingly contentious dynamics it had come to represent. The financial outcome confirms the practical wisdom of this decision, while the buyer's appreciation for the very elements Richard and Stephanie dismissed provides unexpected emotional validation. Sarah's understanding reflected our shared professional experience guiding clients through complex life transitions. That balanced perspective reflects exactly what we both advised clients throughout our careers, recognizing emotional significance while making decisions that create strategic advantages rather than limitations. The house served its purpose during important life phases, and now its value can be converted to resources that better serve current circumstances. This framing, honoring the property's past importance while recognizing changed present needs, provided helpful perspective as I navigated this significant transition. Throughout my career, I had observed how certain assets sometimes outlived their original purpose, while retaining both financial and emotional value that could be redirected toward more currently relevant priorities rather than maintained out of mere habit or expectation. Have you heard from Richard since he discovered the listing? Sarah asked, addressing the family dynamics that had precipitated this decision beyond purely financial considerations. Several messages and one visit, I confirmed, describing his evolving approach from initial shock to tactical positioning. His arguments have shifted from questioning my decision-making capacity to suggesting tax implications I've supposedly overlooked to finally offering compromises that would maintain his influence without addressing the fundamental respect issues that created this situation. Sarah's assessment reflected our shared understanding of family property dynamics. That progression follows typical patterns when initial control attempts fail, moving from challenging competence to technical objections to compromise offers that preserve influence without addressing underlying problems. His response confirms the wisdom of decisive action rather than incremental boundary setting that invites continued testing and erosion. This validation, that my approach aligned with professional best practices rather than representing emotional overreaction, provided important perspective amid challenging family dynamics. Throughout my career, I had observed how decisive financial actions often created clearer boundaries than continued conversation, when fundamental respect issues remained unaddressed despite repeated discussion. The following day, Stephanie made her first direct contact since discovering the property listing, a carefully worded email that revealed both professional calculation and genuine concern about implications beyond the house itself. Margaret, while we respect your right to make housing decisions, we're concerned about the rushed timing and potential loss of family history the house represents. Perhaps we could discuss options that address your concerns while preserving this important family asset for future generations. This framing, acknowledging my right to make decisions while simultaneously characterizing those decisions as rushed and potentially harmful to family history, represented another manipulation tactic I had observed throughout my professional career. The suggestion that properly considered choices with substantial financial benefits somehow constituted impulsive actions requiring intervention revealed the continued dismissal of my competence despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. My response maintained professional courtesy while establishing clear boundaries regarding both the decision's legitimacy and the family dynamics it addressed. Thank you for your message. The decision to sell reflects careful consideration of both financial opportunities and personal preferences after long-standing concerns about respect and autonomy remained unaddressed despite multiple conversations. The property's substantial appreciation provides resources that create options better aligned with my current priorities, while the buyer's specific appreciation for the home's craftsmanship ensures its character will be preserved rather than eliminated through the modernization you've repeatedly suggested. This response, acknowledging their stated concern while firmly maintaining my position's legitimacy, reflected the balanced approach I had employed throughout my professional career when addressing manipulative tactics with clear boundaries rather than defensive justification. By referencing both financial benefits and the preservation of character elements they had dismissed, I established that my decision served multiple valid purposes beyond merely responding to relationship dynamics. Richard's approach shifted significantly after receiving the formal closing notice from Helena, moving from challenging the decision's legitimacy to negotiating potential financial benefits despite the changed circumstances. Mom, if you're determined to sell despite our concerns, we should at least discuss how the proceeds might benefit the entire family through strategic distribution or potential investment in shared vacation property that creates new family gathering space. This pivot, from questioning my competence to suggesting entitlement to proceeds, represented another tactic I had observed throughout my professional career. The assumption that family members deserved access to assets they hadn't created, particularly after demonstrating disrespect toward the person who had built those assets, revealed the entitled perspective that had necessitated protective measures beyond mere conversation. My response maintained professional clarity while establishing appropriate boundaries regarding financial expectations. The proceeds from property I purchased with your father and maintained for 45 years will be managed according to my financial priorities, which include securing appropriate housing for my current needs, establishing resources for potential future care requirements, and supporting causes that reflect values James and I shared throughout our marriage. Any eventual inheritance will proceed according to the updated estate plan that reflects demonstrated relationship patterns rather than automatic entitlement regardless of behavior. This framework, prioritizing my legitimate needs and values, while acknowledging potential future inheritance based on relationship quality rather than mere expectation, established appropriate boundaries regarding both current assets and future possibilities. Throughout my career, I had advised clients to create explicit connection between relationship behaviors and financial expectations, recognizing that entitlement, regardless of treatment, encouraged continued disrespect rather than authentic connection. With 2 weeks remaining before closing, I identified the perfect next residence, a light-filled condominium overlooking Riverside Park, with modern accessibility features that accommodated potential future needs without the institutional atmosphere Richard had repeatedly referenced when suggesting I might not be able to manage my current home. The property featured a spacious main living area for entertaining, 2 guest bedrooms for visitors I actually chose to host, and a balcony overlooking the duck pond where James and I had often enjoyed morning coffee during weekend walks. At $485,000, this purchase would absorb approximately half the proceeds from my house sale, leaving substantial resources for both investment and current enjoyment. Working with Marcus Taylor, I established a diversified portfolio designed to generate reliable income while preserving capital for future needs and eventual charitable contributions, reflecting values James and I had shared throughout our marriage. Most significantly, I allocated funds for experiences I had deferred during years of accommodating family gatherings that increasingly diminished rather than enhanced well-being. A photography workshop in Santa Fe I had longed to attend. Cooking classes focusing on cuisines James and I had enjoyed exploring together, and membership in the Historical Society, where several former clients had found meaningful community after similar life transitions. These decisions, prioritizing genuine interests and values rather than continued accommodation of others' expectations, represented the self-advocacy I had encouraged in clients throughout my professional career. The financial resources created through property sale provided opportunities to construct life aligned with actual preferences rather than merely responding to others' assumptions about appropriate activities for someone my age. As the closing date approached, I methodically sorted through decades of accumulated possessions, distinguishing between items with genuine emotional significance and those maintained merely through habit or inertia. James's handcrafted furniture, the pieces he had created in the workshop Stephanie had wanted to convert to a home gym, would move with me to the new condominium, where their craftsmanship would receive proper appreciation rather than being dismissed as outdated. Family photographs would be carefully preserved and displayed in the new space, while the specific walls that had held them would transfer to new owners who valued the home's character enough to pay premium price for its preservation. This process, separating meaningful connections from specific physical locations, provided unexpected emotional clarity amid significant transition. Throughout my career, I had observed how certain properties sometimes became symbols that confined rather than preserved important memories, creating obligation to maintain specific spaces that ultimately limited rather than enhanced life's continuing evolution. 3 days before closing, Emma requested meeting for lunch, the first direct contact from any family member that didn't specifically reference the house sale or attempt to change my decisions. We met at a small cafe near her university, where her demeanor suggested genuine concern beyond property considerations that had dominated her parents' responses. "Grandma, I don't care about the house or money or any of that," she began with the direct honesty that reminded me of James's straightforward approach to difficult conversations. "I just want to make sure you're okay, and that we'll still have relationship regardless of what happens with Mom and Dad. Their behavior at Thanksgiving was terrible, and I understand why you're making changes. I just don't want to lose my grandmother because my parents messed up." This distinction, separating our relationship from both property considerations and her parents' behavior, demonstrated emotional maturity beyond her 19 years. Her capacity to recognize legitimate boundaries without personalizing necessary consequences revealed the independent thinking I had always tried to nurture during our time together. "Our relationship exists independently from property decisions or your parents' choices," I assured her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand gently. "You'll always be my granddaughter regardless of housing arrangements or family dynamics. My new place actually has a lovely guest room that will be available whenever you want to visit, without the complicated expectations that had begun surrounding gatherings at the house." Emma's evident relief suggested she had been carrying significant concern about potential relationship loss beyond property considerations. "I was worried you might think I agreed with how they've been treating you just because I'm their daughter. Dad keeps talking about family assets and generational wealth, like the house was somehow already partly his, even though you paid for it and maintained it all these years." This glimpse into private family discussions revealed the entitled perspective that had necessitated protective measures beyond mere conversation. The framing of property I had purchased and maintained as family assets, regardless of contribution or behavior, demonstrated precisely the problematic attitude the contingency clause had been designed to address. Family relationships and financial entitlement are separate considerations, I explained, drawing on decades of professional experience guiding clients through similar dynamics. Love and respect exist independently from property transfer, which is why my estate plan specifically connects inheritance with demonstrated relationship patterns rather than automatic entitlement regardless of behavior. Emma's thoughtful nod, suggested genuine understanding beyond her years. That actually makes more sense than how Dad explains it. He keeps talking about the house like it was already partly his just because he grew up there, even though he hasn't contributed to its maintenance or even lived there in decades. It's like he believes being your son automatically makes him entitled to your property regardless of how he treats you. This insightful observation, identifying entitlement disconnect from her own perspective rather than through my explanation, demonstrated Emma's capacity for independent ethical assessment beyond family loyalty pressures. Her ability to recognize problematic patterns without defensive justification suggested potential for more balanced relationship than her parents had established, despite decades more life experience. Property rights and family relationships should ideally support rather than undermine each other, I noted, sharing perspective developed through 30 years helping clients navigate similar dynamics. When financial expectations become disconnected from mutual respect, both aspects of connection suffer rather than either being enhanced. Our lunch extended beyond anticipated time as Emma shared insights about her studies, her growing interest in environmental law, and her concerns about maintaining connection with both her brother and me, despite increasing family tensions. Her capacity for nuanced understanding of complex relationship dynamics suggested potential for authentic connection beyond the manipulative patterns her parents had established. Lucas isn't as comfortable directly addressing things as I am, she explained regarding her brother's absence from recent communications. But he was really upset about how Dad treated you at Thanksgiving. He just expresses it by withdrawing rather than confronting, which sometimes looks like agreement when it's actually discomfort with conflict. This compassionate interpretation of her brother's behavior, recognizing his discomfort without excusing continued disconnection, demonstrated emotional intelligence that transcended her 19 years. Her capacity to understand others' coping mechanisms without accepting their consequences as inevitable revealed wisdom many adults never develop, despite decades more life experience. As we concluded our lunch with plans for regular contact, regardless of broader family dynamics, Emma offered perspective that captured essential wisdom beyond her years. Sometimes standing up for yourself teaches others more than continuing to accommodate behavior that shouldn't be acceptable. Dad and Mom might eventually learn something important from you enforcing boundaries, even if they're upset about it right now. This insight, that appropriate boundary enforcement sometimes provides more meaningful lessons than continued accommodation, represented wisdom I had shared with countless clients throughout my professional career. The recognition that temporary relationship discomfort might ultimately create potential for healthier connection reflected understanding many people never develop despite decades more life experience. On the morning of closing, I completed final walkthrough of the house that had witnessed 45 years of family history. The kitchen where James and I had prepared countless meals, the dining room where we had hosted decades of gatherings, the garden where I had cultivated roses that had won community recognition. Rather than overwhelming sadness, I experienced surprising peace, recognition that this space had served its purpose during important life phases, and would now continue its story with new family creating their own memories within its walls. Thubao. Young couple purchasing the property arrived for final paperwork, with evident excitement about beginning their family's story in space that held such clearly apparent character and craftsmanship. "We're so grateful you maintained the original features rather than modernizing everything," the wife commented while admiring James's handcrafted cabinets. "These details are exactly what drew us to older homes instead of new construction. You can feel the care and intention that went into creating this space. This appreciation, valuing exactly the elements Richard and Stephanie had persistently criticized as outdated, provided unexpected validation beyond mere financial return. The qualities they had dismissed as mere sentimentality represented genuine value to discerning purchasers who recognized craftsmanship and character, rather than merely following temporary design trends. The formal closing proceeded with the efficient professionalism Helena maintained throughout complex transactions. Within 90 minutes, ownership officially transferred from the family home I had maintained for 45 years to the young couple eager to begin their own story within its walls. The proceeds, $912,000 less minimal closing costs, would transfer to my account by end of business day, providing resources that would fund next life chapter based on genuine preferences rather than others' expectations. As I handed the keys to the new owners, I shared perspective developed through this significant transition. This house wants to be filled with life and laughter. It was created for family gatherings and memory-making. I'm delighted it will continue. That purpose with your children growing up in spaces where my son once played. Houses have their own stories that continue beyond any single chapter. This framing, recognizing the property's continuing purpose beyond my specific ownership, provided meaningful closure while acknowledging its enduring value beyond mere financial considerations. Throughout my career, I had observed how such perspective often facilitated positive transitions when significant properties changed hands, creating continuity beyond specific ownership that honored both past significance and future potential. Later that afternoon, as funds from the sale appeared in my account, I completed the purchase of my Riverside condominium with similar efficiency. By evening, I held keys to my new home, a space selected based on my actual preferences rather than others' expectations or mere historical continuity. The property's modern accessibility features provided convenience without institutional atmosphere, while its location overlooking the park where James and I had enjoyed countless weekend walks maintained connection to meaningful memories without confining future possibilities. With both transactions completed, I sent brief message to Richard and Stephanie, informing them of the sale's conclusion and my new address should they wish to communicate through appropriate channels that demonstrated respect for boundaries I had clearly established. The message maintained professional courtesy while establishing clear expectations regarding future interaction. Both property transactions have successfully concluded. My new address is 847 Riverside Drive, Unit 305. Future communication and visits are welcome when based on mutual respect rather than continued attempts to influence financial decisions or question my capacity for independent choice. Richard's response came within minutes, a message that revealed genuine shock beyond tactical adjustment despite weeks of awareness regarding the pending sale. I still can't believe you actually sold our family home without proper family discussion. Where will holiday gatherings happen now? What about family traditions and continuity? These rushed decisions impact everyone, not just you. This framing, positioning my legitimate property decisions as communal rather than individual matters, revealed the fundamental disconnect that had necessitated decisive action beyond continued conversation. The suggestion that disposing of property I had purchased and maintained somehow required family discussion, despite clear individual ownership, demonstrated precisely the entitled perspective that had created our current conflict. My response maintained boundaries while addressing specific concerns. Holiday gatherings can occur wherever participants demonstrate mutual respect rather than predetermined locations, regardless of treatment. Family traditions exist through values and relationships, not specific physical spaces. The new condominium includes guest accommodations that welcome visitors who approach interaction with appropriate boundaries rather than entitlement. This framework, connecting future gatherings to demonstrated respect rather than automatic inclusion regardless of behavior, established clear expectations regarding relationship development beyond property considerations. Throughout my career, I had advised clients to create explicit connections between relationship quality and continued access, recognizing that entitlement regardless of treatment encouraged disrespect rather than authentic connection. 2 days after moving into my new condominium, I received unexpected email from Lucas, his first direct communication since the Thanksgiving incident that had precipitated significant changes. Unlike his parents' messages focused primarily on property and financial considerations, His note addressed relationship dynamics with surprising maturity for his 17 years. Grandma, I'm sorry for not speaking up at Thanksgiving when Dad was being disrespectful. Emma's always better at saying things directly in difficult moments. But I should have supported you too. I miss our chess games and conversations about photography. If it's okay with you, I'd like to visit your new place sometime and maybe restart our Sunday afternoon games. This outreach, focusing on relationship rather than property or financial considerations, demonstrated emotional intelligence that transcended mere reactivity to changed circumstances. His capacity to acknowledge specific behavior concerns while suggesting meaningful reconnection based on shared interests revealed potential for authentic relationship beyond manipulative patterns his parents had established. My response encouraged this potential connection while maintaining appropriate boundaries regarding broader family dynamics. I would love to continue our chess games and photography discussions. The new place has perfect light for viewing prints, and the park across the street offers excellent opportunities for practicing composition techniques we've discussed. Your thoughtful message means a great deal, Lucas. Relationship quality has always mattered more to me than specific properties or financial considerations. This framing, prioritizing authentic connection beyond material concerns, established foundation for potential relationship development based on mutual respect rather than obligation or expectation. Throughout my career, I had observed how younger family members sometimes developed healthier interaction patterns than their parents had established, particularly when clear boundaries provided alternative models beyond manipulative dynamics they had witnessed during formative years. As I settled into my new home over subsequent weeks, arranging James's handcrafted furniture in spaces specifically selected to showcase their craftsmanship, displaying family photographs and arrangements that honored memories without confining future possibilities, I experienced unexpected lightness beyond mere physical downsizing. The property's thoughtful design provided everything needed for comfortable daily living, while eliminating maintenance obligations that had increasingly become focus of conflict rather than genuine necessity. Most significantly, the financial resources created through property sale-funded experiences that enhanced life quality rather than merely maintaining status quo. The photography workshop I attended in Santa Fe connected me with a vibrant community of fellow enthusiasts spanning diverse ages and backgrounds. The cooking classes focusing on Mediterranean cuisine James and I had enjoyed exploring together created both new skills and social connections extending beyond age-segregated activities Richard had repeatedly suggested as appropriate for someone your age. 3 months after moving, I hosted small gathering in my new home, the first social event explicitly designed around my actual preferences rather than others' expectations. Emma and Lucas attended without their parents, bringing genuine enthusiasm for connection beyond obligation or expectation. Several former colleagues who had remained friends beyond professional association contributed potluck dishes reflecting diverse cultural backgrounds we had enjoyed exploring together throughout our careers. As evening sunlight streamed through windows overlooking the park where James and I had spent countless weekend mornings, conversation flowed with authentic engagement rather than the strained performance Richard and Stephanie's gatherings had increasingly become. Discussion ranged from current photography projects to progressive cooking techniques to community initiatives addressing environmental concerns, topics selected based on genuine interest rather than prescribed social expectations. When Emma commented on how comfortable the gathering felt compared to previous family events, I shared perspective developed through this significant transition. Authentic connection flourishes when founded on mutual respect rather than obligation or expectation. This space was selected to facilitate meaningful interaction rather than impress or accommodate others' assumptions about appropriate environments. The difference you're feeling reflects intentional choices about both physical surroundings and relationship expectations. This framework, prioritizing authentic connection beyond material impressiveness, provided educational model beyond direct instruction, demonstrating through lived experience, rather than mere rhetoric, how different approaches to both physical spaces and relationship dynamics created fundamentally different emotional environments. Throughout my career, I had observed how such modeling often influenced younger generations more profoundly than explicit advice, providing alternative possibilities beyond patterns they had witnessed during formative years. 6 months after selling, the family home that had become battleground for control rather than sanctuary for connection, I received an unexpected message from Richard. The first communication focused primarily on relationship rather than property or financial considerations. His tone suggested reflection beyond tactical adjustment, though whether this represented genuine evolution or merely strategic repositioning remained unclear from written communication alone. "Mom, I've been doing some thinking about how things escalated around Thanksgiving and afterward. While I still believe selling the house was an extreme response, I recognize that my comment about housework was disrespectful, regardless of property discussions. That wasn't how Dad would have wanted me to speak to you, and it's not the example I should set for Emma and Lucas about how family members treat each other." This acknowledgement, separating disrespectful behavior from legitimate disagreement about property decisions, suggested potential for more nuanced understanding beyond the entitled perspective that had created our conflict. The reference to James's expectations established connection to values beyond mere tactical compliance, indicating possible recognition of principles rather than merely consequences that had precipitated current estrangement. My response maintained appropriate boundaries while acknowledging potential for relationship development beyond past patterns. Thank you for this reflection, Richard. The distinction between legitimate disagreement and disrespectful treatment represents important recognition beyond specific property decisions. Meaningful relationship exists through consistent mutual respect rather than mere blood connection or financial entitlement. Should you wish to rebuild connection based on these principles rather than previous patterns, I remain open to gradual engagement that demonstrates sustained understanding rather than merely temporary adjustment to changed circumstances. This framework, requiring demonstrated change beyond mere verbal acknowledgement, established appropriate expectations regarding potential reconciliation beyond immediate conflict resolution. Throughout my career, I had advised clients that healthy relationship development, following significant boundary violations, required sustained behavioral evidence rather than merely tactical positioning that reverted to problematic patterns once immediate consequences dissipated. As I approach my 74th birthday in my Riverside condominium, surrounded by meaningful possessions specifically selected rather than merely accumulated, engaged in activities chosen through genuine preference rather than others' expectations, I reflect on the journey from accommodation to appropriate assertiveness, with professional clarity enhanced by personal experience. The financial advisor who spent 3 decades helping women maintain dignity and autonomy during life transitions has now navigated her own most challenging case, balancing emotional complexity with strategic wisdom that created enhanced life quality, rather than merely continued existence within increasingly problematic patterns. The proceeds from house sale have funded both secure housing aligned with actual preferences and experiences that enhance life quality beyond mere accumulation or maintenance. The photography previously relegated to occasional hobby has developed into genuine artistic practice through workshops and mentoring relationships with established professionals who value perspective developed through decades of lived experience. Rather than dismissing creative expression as merely keeping busy during retirement. Most significantly, relationships with Emma and Lucas have developed based on authentic connection rather than obligation or expectation, creating intergenerational bonds founded on mutual respect rather than automatic entitlement regardless of behavior. Their regular visits to my new home, shaped by genuine interest rather than dutiful appearance at obligatory family gatherings, demonstrate potential for meaningful connection beyond problematic patterns their parents established despite decades. More life experience. When people ask whether I regret selling the family home that witnessed 45 years of history, my response reflects wisdom developed through both professional expertise and personal experience. The memories that matter transcend specific physical spaces, living through values and relationships rather than merely walls and furnishings. The house served its purpose during important life phases, and its value has now been converted to resources that enhance current circumstances rather than maintaining patterns that ultimately diminished rather than supported authentic connection. This perspective, honoring past significance while creating future possibilities, represents wisdom I shared with countless clients throughout my professional career, now applied to personal circumstances with equally transformative results. The financial advisor who helped others navigate complex life transitions has successfully implemented that same expertise in her own most challenging case, creating enhanced quality of life rather than merely continued existence within increasingly problematic patterns. Sometimes the most meaningful stand we take involves converting assets that no longer serve their original purpose into resources that create new possibilities aligned with current realities, rather than past patterns. And sometimes, the most powerful legacy we establish comes through modeling appropriate boundary enforcement, rather than continued accommodation of behavior that ultimately diminishes rather than enhances authentic connection across generations. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.